Right. So assignment 4 builds on the assignment 3 in that we're going to use exactly the same templates, controllers, and services, the client-side services, but we're going to add server-side services. Okay. Up to this point, all the content, all the data is being hosted on the client side, and the data, the templates and the controllers, yes, that's where they belong. But the data itself should live further down the stack, okay, in the server side and eventually the database side. Right? So this week we're going to focus on the server side, how to host RESTful web services on our servers, right? And we're going to move the mock data that we've been using for the last couple of weeks. We're going to move it to the server side. Eventually, next week, we're going to move it where it actually belongs in the database, right? So this is what we're going to be working on this week. We're going to use the Express Node.js library to expose routes or URLs that the client can go back and ask for data. Okay. Right now, the data is being hosted in the client-side services, right, in the user service, in the website service, in the widget service, right? That's where the data is. What it really should do is go and fetch that data from the server. Right, and asking for a list of users or a list of websites or a list of pages from the server, and the server would respond with the data depending on what the routes are. So to do that, we're going to introduce today RESTful web services and the various HTTP verbs that we're going to be using for manipulating the data that is hosted on the server. Following the RESTful nomenclature, we're going to be using these 4 verbs for creating, retrieving, updating, or removing existing data from the server. Right? So this is a very common design pattern that it's used for implementing RESTful services. So we're going to be creating on the server side. We're going to create a new directory /assignment, and that's where we're going to be hosting all our server-side code. Right? Notice that it's /assignment. It's not in the public directory. Right? So if it's in the public directory, it means that it's accessible from anyone that has a browser or knows where to find the file. Notice that it's outside of the public directory. Instead, it's off of the root of our project, right? And then we're going to put our code inside of an assignment directory. For your project directory. For your project, you can put it in a separate projects directory. Right? All your server-side code would live under there. For now, we're just going to focus on the assignment. So app.js is going to be our entry point to our server-side application. Right? It's going to work in tandem with the client-side application. Right? So there's going to be a little application run. The application we've been working on so far running on the browser is going to be collaborating with this server-side application that's going to be running on our server. Okay? Now, this app.js is running on our server, okay? Whereas the app.js that is running on the browser is running on somebody else's browser, right? It's somebody else's machine. We don't have control over that, right? We have it's their browser. We don't have control over the exact browser version they're using, and that's okay since we are using Angular. Angular uses jQuery underneath, right? So it abstracts the vendor and the specific version of the browser, which is good. But on our side. On the server side, we have more control over the exact machine that we're going to run on this, right? We have access to the file system, we have access to our local databases, access to unrestricted access to the network. So this app.js is JavaScript running on the server, and we have full control over that machine. In here as well, we're going to be hosting several services, and one for each data type that we are storing in one for each domain object that we want to remember or store anything or for our data model, right? And we're going to host them under a directory called services, right? And these notice these names, right? We have one to handle users, one for handling websites, one for handling pages, one for handling widgets, one per domain object, okay, or type of user. And each one is going to have implementations for the various CRUD operations for each one of these data types. So for each one of these, you're going to be able to create, remove, update, retrieve instances of these data types. Okay. And if you notice, these are mirror images. They're going to be mirror images to the client-side services that we worked on last week. Okay. Last week we worked on similar files called user service client.js, right? And they were hosting the data on the client side in hard-coded arrays of users, hard-coded arrays of websites, pages, and whatnot. Yes? And they had their CRUD operations, right? That allow you to create users or create pages or create widgets. Same thing, be able to find them, remove them, update them. Yes? That's what we focused on last week. So we're going to move a lot of that logic of manipulating that data model. We're going to move it to the server side. And we're going to have to connect these two folks, right? We're going to have to connect the client side of this with the server side that we're going to work on this week. And the way they're going to be connected is by using HTTP connections, right? An HTTP connection from the browser, right, that is running the client side, and an HTTP listener, right, on the server side, listening for incoming requests. Make sense? So from the server side, we're going to be creating these modules on the server side, listening for incoming requests. Well, this is app.js. So app.js is going to be our entry point. Right? It's just going to be a module that is actually requiring the services for now. Only the services for now. Next week we're going to be adding data modeling and so on and so forth. But for now, we're going to load this app.js. The only thing that it's going to do is going to load these other 4 server-side services, web services. Okay, that's all it does. Notice, right? It's being passed app.js, and we are requiring these services that are local to the file system. Then on each of these services, we're going to be listening for incoming posts, gets, puts, deletes, requests coming from the client. Right? What the client is going to do is that when you try to update a user or retrieve a website or retrieve an app, a page and whatnot, what it's going to do, instead of manipulating the data in the service, is going to invoke the implementation on the server side. It's going to generate all these HTTP requests on the server side, and the server side is going to be implementing all these manipulation. Right, so we're not going to manipulate anything anymore on the client side. Right? Instead, the client is going to delegate that to the server. It's going to say, "Hey, server, the user just created a new user, or they created a new website, or they created a new page, or they removed their widget." Right? Okay, and it's going to notify the server, and the server is the one who's going to manipulate those pieces of data, but on the server side. Make sense? Okay. So for the user service, right? These are the CRUD operations, right? We're going to be able to create a brand new user, right? Create a user. Notice that these have the same exact names that we have implemented on the client side, right? Last week, right? These have exactly the same names, but implemented on the server side. And the way they're going to know which one to execute is that the client is going to generate an HTTP post, or an HTTP get, or an HTTP put, or an HTTP delete. Okay, following a URL that's going to follow a particular syntax, right, or structure, which is very similar to the structure we've been using for the routing on the client side, right? It is very, very similar to the routes that we've been using to display the various templates. Yes, all right. We're going to follow the same syntax for sending this request to the client, right? So here are the routes. If you post to the user API, then we're going to be executing on the server the function to create a new user. And it's going to do basically the same thing that we used to do on the client. It's just going to push onto an array. Okay, but that array, instead of living on the client side, now is going to live on the server side. Okay. To delete a user, we're going to send an HTTP delete message to the server, providing the ID of the user that we want to remove, and we're going to execute on the server a delete user, and it's going to be exactly the same thing we did on the client. We're going to splice that particular user from the array. Okay? All right, so we're going to move a lot of the code that we have from the client side. We're going to move it to the server side. And we have the same thing for the websites, for the pages, and they all host several CRUD operations. Okay. Let's see what else. We're going to have to refactor our web services, our client-side web services. We're going to have to rip out those arrays. Right? They're no longer going to live on the client side, and we're going to have to move them to the server side. Plus we're going to have to deal with the challenge of having two machines talking to one another, right, through a network. Right now, when you're interacting with the browser and you're adding users or removing pages or adding widgets or whatnot, right? It's all running on the browser, right? Running on one single machine, on the laptop or machine right in front of you, correct? But since we're going to move a lot of that logic onto the server side, the connection is going to be a network connection, okay? And those network connections, there could be some latency associated with them, right? So we need to take that into account. We might send a request to the server to do something, but it might take a couple of milliseconds, or the server might just not respond, right? Something might have gone wrong with the network connection. So we need to deal with that, right? with latencies or the chances that we lose any connections between the browser and the server, right? Regardless, we need to deal with those issues. So to deal with them, we're going to introduce the notion of promises. So promises are going to allow us to deal with these intercommunication, process communication, right? With the browser talking to our server, so to deal with this asynchronously, right? To make sure that the thread that is running on the browser, right, and the thread that is running on the server side, right, that they don't become synchronous to each other, right? So that if I send a request from the client to the server, right, the client is not blocked waiting for the server to come back, right? These communications need to be asynchronous, right? So we'll deal on how to do that. Usually, it's done through some asynchronous call. The client uses AJAX, an asynchronous communication, and asks the browser, "Hey, browser, you deal with the request, right? So I can go back and deal with and handle user events, and I'm not blocked. And let me know when the server responds, right? When the server responds, let me know, okay? So I can handle the response to come back. So to deal with that, we're going to introduce the notion of promises. It's a concept that abstracts the notion of asynchronous communication. All right. Also, here we're going to introduce how to deal with sorting widgets. We're going to add we're going to use jQuery UI that we introduced maybe the beginning of last week, right? That allowed us to move the widgets around. Okay, so we're going to add that, we're going to implement that inside of a directive on how to properly use jQuery from within Angular through the use of directives, and also implement it on the server side, right? When you drag something on the client side, right? It might look like it moved on the client because you manipulated the DOM, right? Perhaps you removed it from one portion of the DOM and you put it somewhere else in the DOM. That's what jQuery is doing for you, right? But that needs to be made permanent, right? And the only way to make that permanent is to notify the server and say, "Hey, server, the following widget moved from position 6 to position 3." Right? The only way to make that permanent is to go back to the server and say, "Hey, server, the widget that lives on in this particular page moved from this particular index to this particular index," right? And the server needs to comply and and splice the widget from one position and paste it back into another position. It actually needs to move it around, right? So we're going to introduce how to do that. Let's see. Also, for the image widget, we're going to introduce the capability of being able to upload images. So in the last assignment, we were able to copy and paste a URL, right, to an existing image. Right, we copied it inside of the widget. This time around, we're going to enhance the the image widget so that we can upload an image, right? So remember we had a lot like an upload file input field, right? That allow you to navigate to a particular file. So we're gonna add that so that you can upload pictures. Here's a snippet on how to get started with that. How to handle on the client side as a form that submits a file, and then on the client and on the server side, how to catch that file that's going to be streaming from the browser over to the server side and copy that file, that image file, onto the local server. Okay, let's see. Also, Flickr image support. Well, we might not be able to get to this time around. But anyway, the original assignment asks to also allow for searching for images in Flickr. Use a third-party API, right? Flickr is one of several available APIs. Right, it allows you to search for images, based on terms and titles or search terms, right? And this allows you to retrieve images that match a particular search criteria, right? So here is a couple of starting code that allows you to search for a photo, right? So not only can you upload an image, you can also presumably search from a third-party API such as Flickr, all right? So this allows you to provide a search text and then retrieve from Flickr. Retrieve those pictures that match a particular search criteria, and then render the photos locally on your browser, right? And then be able to select a particular image and say, "Ooh, this is the image that I want." Okay. So there'll be three ways that you can add an image using the image widget, right? One is just copy and pasting a URL to an image that you already know, right? Either from a Google search or whatever, right? That was how we did it last week. So this week would be adding, being able to upload an image, right? And the third way would be to be able to search for an image using a third-party API. Right? This also will give you a chance to practice how to interact with a third-party API, of which I assume most of you have already identified a third-party API by now, right? And are diligently working on your project. Using that API and playing around with it, see if you find any limitations with those APIs. Yeah, so you're able to select the photo and then add that photo to your widget. The deliverables would be assignment 4, and you're going to tag it as assignment 4, and the same things apply. So here are some of the wireframes for searching from Flickr. Right. So, for instance, from the image widget, you would now be able to click on search. It would take you to a search page. You type in a term, you search, and it gives you images from Flickr. And when you select a particular image, the URL for that image is what gets stored in the widget. Okay, the actual URL. Yes. We'll do NG form a little later. We're going to use it for validation purposes and whatnot. But for now, just for upload. Only for upload, yeah. If you know how to use NG form, you can get started on that. But we'll talk about that when we do validation. Yeah, we're going to use NG form for validation later on. But if you feel comfortable with using NG form, you go ahead. All right. The HTML widget, we're going to leave it for the next assignment. So these two are for the next assignment. But eventually, we're going to add support for the HTML widget, right? And the HTML widget was going to allow you to either copy and paste HTML from Gizmodo or from anywhere, right, and just paste it in here, or allow you to actually type, right, using a WYSIWYG editor, that allows you to create actual HTML and allow you to format it, and this would be stored in the widget text field. Right. So yeah. So we're gonna deal with this next assignment. Any questions so far? Yes.
So we won't have to do the HTML, but we will have to do the Flickr for this.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'll show you how to do it here. Right. So for now, I'd like to get started on the moving the server side. A lot of the code that right now it's in the client side, moving out to the server. Right. I'm going to do it for users, user for websites. But once you know how to do that for those two, I think it should be enough for you to get started on the pages and the widgets on your own. Okay. All right.